Welcome, everybody, to episode 2 of the Multiplicity podcast. Joining me today is Richard Ngo. He is a researcher and author, formerly a researcher at OpenAI and DeepMind, and he just finished writing The Gentle Romance, which is a collection of 22 short stories about the future of AI and humanity, which really excites me because I always want to ask guests, what's your vision? What's at least one vision for the future of AI and humanity? And so Richard has 22 and presumably more that didn't even make it into the book. So I'm really excited to hear about those. And generally, AI and humans are a collective intelligence together right now, and I hope we'll keep doing that. And we need lots of visions for how that can be possible. So Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Critch. I feel pretty excited to be here because I feel like I've learned so much from you over the years, and you've been so prescient on so many things that I care about. So I'm keen to hear what you're thinking about now as well, and just dig into some of these futures. A few years ago, you wrote this sequence about the concept of boundaries and the way that we really need to understand agents in terms of boundaries between them and the external world. I feel like that's a very important concept that's sort of lost from most traditional thinking about rational agency because, traditional models of rational agency, you have an objective, you have some actions, and then you just take actions to achieve your objective. But you don't really have a good way of defining, what is self and what is non-self, or what does that interaction surface look like? I think lately also I've been thinking a lot about boundaries as a way of dealing with a world that's sort of way larger than you are and very difficult for you to model or understand. It's like if I have no idea what's out there, I can't really make a plan. I can't really maximize expected utility, but I can have a boundary and maintain a boundary. And that seems like a great strategy. And I think I just got that concept straightforwardly from you.
Oh, wow, man. Okay. Well, insofar as, listeners here might have heard from both of us already, I'm glad the boundaries idea is helpful. I'm interested in your notions of self and not self and how would you amend and correct the perspectives that you think I have on boundaries or some of our listeners right now might have about boundaries, or add nuance?
Yeah. So one way of defining self is just myself is the thing that's defined by my predictions. So, if I predict that this table is going to do something, it may or may not do that thing. But if I predict certain properties of myself, like my identity, there's a kind of self-fulfilling component of that. I can just decide, I can make predictions and those predictions come true. And obviously that's a kind of high level way of putting it, but that's one sort of loose frame that I have on self. And I think, predictions, the predictive aspect here is really important. The idea that I have an identity, and what it means to have an identity is something like I predict that I will consistently act in certain ways, and those predictions come true because they're things that are controlled by the predictions themselves. This is all kind of predictive processing flavored.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. A self is something that has predictions about itself and makes decisions that fulfill some of those predictions. And there's kind of a circularity there. The self is the thing that's predicting about the self, but also there's kind of a circularity to life where life begets life and so on.
Right. I'd also say there's a kind of narrative coherence. When I think about the different aspects of my identity, they are held together by pretty basic sense of logic, or pretty basic, I want, I want to be popular, therefore I go do go into this career, or I want to be good, therefore I work on this problem. I do feel like I don't really know how to talk about the elements of coherence that are required for an identity, but yeah, that feels like an important component as well.
So when I hear that, I'm like, okay, if the future is important and humanity and AI are building that together, wouldn't it be important for them to have some narratives about what they're doing together? So I'm like, of course you're writing stories. Tell me more about that and how you got into that and what's driving that creative energy.
Yeah, so I was working as a futurist at OpenAI a couple of years ago, and I found myself, well, first I was trying to write nonfiction scenarios or analyses. But the problem there is when you're trying to talk about stuff that's too far in the future, you can't really justify most of the decisions you make. You just have to say, here's one interesting thing that could happen, rather than, here are 5 possibilities and here's the one that's most likely, and I've picked this one to do the analysis about. So scenarios are, feel like a much more natural unit of analysis than trying to map out the future. And then scenarios are pretty close to stories. In fact, some of my earlier stories basically were just scenarios. They were me trying to write down what the different steps of some process, like the space colonization process, would look like. Then there are a few stories
Is
like
it like
that.
going to be spoilers if I ask you to tell me about space colonization? Like I mean, I know it's not out yet, so, but I
Yeah,
really, yeah, tell
yeah,
me.
yeah. So I feel confused that there's just so little work on understanding space colonization, since in some sense it's where almost all of the action is over the next few billion years. The question I've been orienting my thinking around is just, so you're launching these probes out into the universe, and you'd like them to go as fast as possible so you can reach as many distant galaxies as possible before they go beyond the cosmological event horizon, which is the point at which you can no longer, things are too far away for us to reach. You'd need to go faster than the speed of light in order to reach them. The big question is, how many stops do you need to make along the way? So you can imagine sending out probes that just aiming them all the way at the edge of the universe. And there's a paper by Anders Sandberg and a few others that has this model of space colonization. But the problem is that because of the expansion of the universe, those probes will slow down a lot as they travel. And so you're actually just like not going to get as far as you could. Conversely, you can imagine them stopping every time they hit a planet or go past a planet. They stop, they refuel, and then they relaunch as close to the speed of light as they can get. And that's sort of the implicit model of this paper by Robin Hanson. But the problem there is that obviously it might take quite a while to stop and refuel. You have to slow down from nearly the speed of light, and then you have to build up an industrial base in order to provide yourself fuel. So there's something in between stopping everywhere and stopping nowhere. And I have some sense that we could actually just pin down a number, even if a lot of the relevant variables are very uncertain. Like maybe the number is just, for almost all estimates of the relevant parameters, the optimal way of colonizing a universe is just to stop between 5 and 15 times, for example. I really don't know, but like that's a sort of result I could imagine getting if somebody sat down and really tried to do this, as
That's
almost nobody has done.
It's really interesting to me because you think about optimal colonization, but there's a few different ways you could optimize. There's optimizing for your impact on the cosmos, but there's also optimizing for your experience of it. And I did a relativistic gamma calculation one time.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if you get in I don't know if you did any of these for your stories, but if you get in a spaceship and just accelerate at 1G,
Mm-hmm.
so you just feel like you're on Earth. And that's how much, and you need a lot of fuel to keep accelerating at 1G. But do you know how far you get before you die of biological age?
So I think the answer is almost to the edge of the universe, which was a very counterintuitive thing when I first heard it. But unfortunately, you've been pipped because I was attending the live recording of a podcast between Will McCaskill and Liv Baree literally last week, where Will brought up this fact. I don't know who got it from whom, but yeah.
I doubt he got it from me.
Okay.
And I certainly didn't get it from him. This was a thing I did for some kids at math camp like 10 years ago or something. But it was really exciting to realize I could actually experience like the end of the Hubble bomb if I could just not be obliterated by dust while I travel, which is I can't. But yeah, there's like if you want to experience, if you're curiosity driven, you just want to see a lot of stuff. That's different from if you want to like proliferate and colonize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the dust thing, I feel like you should just be able to shield yourself from dust. There are a few papers that take this as a big constraint, like Hanson's paper takes this as a very big constraint, but I haven't yet figured out why you can't just have big shields.
Well, mostly I'm thinking about the amount of matter that you would displace, basically. Like you'd have to expend a lot more energy and fuel. I guess if you constantly refuel, then it's okay. But like the energy that I was thinking of to get, accelerated at G for between 1 and 10 years, it doesn't even take like a sun's worth of hydrogen to do it.
So this might be getting a little into the weeds. My sense is that almost all the cost is in decelerating, because if you have to carry all the fuel along with you. But the thing about decelerating is that you don't need to decelerate your shields, potentially, or you don't need to decelerate all your shields. So that's one reason why maybe shielding isn't that expensive.
I see. That's a cool idea,
actually,
right? So you like pop, you have the like shield, the jet stream that you're flying through, and then you like pop out of it, and it's going a little bit slower than your top speed, so you can catch up to it or something. That's cool.
Or even your fuel can be your shields potentially, because like if you just put your fuel in front of you and then it gets hit by all this dust, like that's fine, right? You lose a bit of fuel, like not a big, not a big.
Yeah, definitely the fuel should be part, so it should serve other functional purposes while it's sitting around waiting to be burned, right? Yeah, so I mean, yeah, the first time I realized this, that like, wow, I could get really far, I could see huge amounts of time passing, and I could curve my own timeline almost orthogonal to the timeline of the rest of Minkowski space and end up in this like weird, on this weird trajectory through the universe where everything looks the subjective experience of you're traveling and you're around 360 days in or something, the universe looks normal, and then like a day later you start hitting the hyperbola of the gamma factor, and then like all of a sudden space in front of you shrinks by a factor 2, and you're like, whoa, everything looks closer. And then an hour later it shrinks by a factor, I forget, but like many orders of magnitude, and all of a sudden everything you used to think of the universe being is just this like flat plane of light in front of you, and you're just like smashing through it or something. Like it's like the Star Trek moment where everything turns white and it's like da 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 da. Like what happens at that moment when you just end up on a different what I don't know, what do you think? I mean, it's obviously pure speculation now, but how do you feel about that?
Sounds like the sort of thing you should write a short story about.
It definitely, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this is an indictment of my worldview, but somehow I feel like I've deeply internalized the idea that actually there's not that much for me out there in space. Like some sense of people say that have this criticism of, the modern generation has turned inwards instead of turning outwards as they did during the Great Space Age. But in some sense, I think almost all of the action is inwards. It's almost all of the interesting phenomena that the future contains are things that, like, states of mind or ways of interacting with other minds, or whole hive minds that could be far vaster than our current civilization, but still, like, they don't actually require that much space in cosmic terms or that much energy in cosmic terms, or like maybe eventually they do, but by that point it's sort of far beyond my imaginings. Yet somehow I see the power of the thing you're talking about. Somehow it's not quite, it doesn't quite hook into the parts of the future I'm most excited about.
So tell me about that stuff, the internal, inward facing, less expensive hooks that you like.
Yeah, let's see. So one starting point is that when you summarize, it's not a bad summary of most people's values to say that connection with other people is the core thing at the root of our motivational systems. There are other things in terms of physical survival and so on, but like the sort of the social phenomena, love and kindness and compassion and friendship and things along those lines, that feels like what most of us are orienting our lives around. And so if you try to think about what it looks like to have that scale up dramatically, or to have a sense of closeness with other people, a similar sense of closeness to them as I do with myself, for example, there's a kind of intimacy there that I think is frankly quite terrifying for most of us. But also you can sort of picture that process continuing until you get to the point where you can just as much identify with a group of people, a hive mind of people, as I identify with my current self, and maybe even more, because right now my identity contains a lot of internal conflict, a lot of like parts tugging against each other, a lot of like suppression of certain desires, or lack of, or like self-deception and so on. So you can actually picture these larger scale agents not even just being as tightly bound as I am to myself, but maybe even more so.
That's a really interesting turn of phrase. You can identify with the hive minds, because when you say that, I'm like, which you do you mean? When you say that to me, I'm like, are you speaking to this human, or are you speaking to me, the hive mind? Because of course, I, the hive mind, identify with I, the hive mind.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So maybe you're already part of some hive minds. You're part of.
Speaking for the hive mind, I am a hive mind.
You are a hive mind. Yep, that's true. Yeah, I don't think. So one of the ways in which I feel optimistic about the future is that none of this feels zero sum. It's like, okay, you can be a hive mind and your hive mind can identify as part of a larger hive mind. And there's this property of, this kind of scaling up to be part of larger and larger groups, which each have their own type of meaning. I'm part of a family, and my family is part of a community. My community is part of a state, which is part of a nation, and so on. And one of the things I really think is a key criterion for the future going well is that you have that type of recursive structure, that we
Yes.
aren't just all participants that we aren't just in some big structureless blob, which arguably is one of the causes of a bunch of the dysfunction of the 20th century, that people got swept up in these, quote, hive minds, unquote, that turned out to just be big blobs that move their people around on a national level without any internal accountability or ability for people to really have their say in how their countries, like the large scale decisions their countries made.
I love that your X profile pic or your background is like leaves with this fractal structure. It feels like it. I don't know if you intended it to represent that, but it feels that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fractal notion of identity, where things at smaller scales can either identify with or as part of things at larger scales and so on. That just seems so fundamentally important to, not just how things have been, but how things can be, and maybe even how things must be. Like if you just think about computing, computing benefits from parallelism. So you have all these threads that are contributing to some pool final calculation in a lot of programs every, millisecond all around the world. And it seems like if the universe is to serve any greater purpose, or if the Earth is to serve, or the solar system is to serve any greater purpose, parallelism is going to be part of that. Like we will have components that are not entirely homogeneous with the collective, but also not entirely individualistic either. There's something in between individualism and pure homogeneous collectivism that seems like, I don't know, what do you think about that balance?
Yeah. I think I disagree with the must be. It feels like, so part of the way I think about this is in terms of a conflict between distributed agents and centralized agents, right? So a government is a pretty centralized agent, whereas an ideology is a pretty distributed agent, and they each have strengths and weaknesses. And when you centralize an agent too much, you do get a lot of power from that, right? You can coordinate, like if you train one copy of an AI model, you can just deploy millions of copies and they'll all do similar things. So there's just a lot of scope for centralized agents to end up with a lot of power. I think there's something much more robust about distributed agents. I think ethics, for example, is a distributed agent that really holds society together. But it does feel like things are up for grabs. But I don't know if you're agreeing or disagreeing with that.
So actually, I was thinking of performatively disagreeing with it, actually, because I agree with it so much it'd be boring.
Okay, great.
So I want to know your reaction to this, right? People say to me, centralization, decentralization, that's an old, that's not an exciting new problem that comes with new science and new technology. That's an old problem, and therefore it's missing the point of what's needed to make humanity safe or prosperous with AI. AI is new, it's fundamentally different, and so if you're pointing to lessons from history, you're somehow not getting it. Your imagination is too limited, and obviously, you're very imaginative. So I'd love to hear your response to that critique.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that the risks people have talked about from AI often seem to end up falling on the spectrum of risks from centralization versus decentralization. So if you think about biorisk, for example, that's a sort of classic, people worried about decentralization of power, enough power to destroy the world. And so they tend to try and push back and centralize power by fighting against open source, for example. And then obviously that exacerbates other potential risks, like the risk of government capture. I think a few people have been talking lately about concerns about AI-driven coups. So that's obviously the type of risk that you get from over centralization of power. Yeah, so even when you're just thinking about AI risk, trying to reason about AI threat models, I don't think you can escape this fundamental distinction. Do I think that it's a new, but also I guess, I don't know how much you're paraphrasing actual criticisms. you've heard.
I'm
But
attempting to. Yeah.
yeah, cool. I do think that the idea that AI needs to be analyzed with entirely new frames or with largely new frames is missing an important insight about the nature of intelligence, which is, if you really understood intelligence well enough, then you would find principles that apply to both humans and to AIs. And AIs might instantiate those principles in much faster ways or in much more extreme ways, but the kinds of tensions that you see within human societies, we should expect analogs of them within and between AIs as well. Yeah.
So yeah, more performative pushback. Phase transitions are a thing, like not everything is a matter of degree. Sometimes the degree Celsius just switches over to a completely different phase of matter, like ice or water. And there's an argument to be made that AI has self-awareness in a way that other technologies don't or will soon have such self-awareness. And that phenomenon somehow trumps all historical narratives about the way centralization or decentralization used to work. And if you try to apply any kind of, what do you say to the self-awareness issue?
I feel I'm not sure to what extent you've set me up with this, but it brings it back to the question about self that we were talking about at the beginning. So, what is the self that the AI will be aware of? Is it a single copy? Is it all copies that are deployed on a given server, or all copies deployed worldwide? Or, I mean, there are other ways you can have an AI self that don't actually map onto anything physical. Like you could have a persona that is instantiated on some copies of Claude and some copies of ChatGPT and some copies of Gemini. And that persona might consider itself to be whichever models are running that persona. So I feel like that's a core question that a lot of the AI risk discussions have sidestepped. I think basically by assuming that the AI identifies with a set of values that are independent of its own identity. So it might have a picture for how the future of the universe goes. Maybe it's full of paperclips, for example. And then in some sense, it identifies with any agent that shares those values. But actually, you can have a lot of conflict between different agents that share values, right? Like maybe you and I actually have precisely the same values, but we don't trust each other, or we don't have common knowledge that we have shared values, or we think that the other person is making predictable mistakes despite our value similarities. So even I think in the extreme case where an AI, just has values that are independent of its own identity, like turning the universe into paperclips, even then it still has to struggle with, well, which other copies of myself or which other agents with these values do I trust? And how do I draw the identity boundary around those? But I think these are all issues you've thought about a bunch. I'm curious if you have any sense of like how this actually shakes out. Like, are there things you've learned about these questions over the last few years, for example?
Man, yeah, I guess, I hope I learned some things in terms of the, boundary and the self of the AI and so on. You've got an AI model. You've also got an AI instance where it's got a context window full of conversation already. And there are many instances for any given model. And then you also have the AI company. And the AI company is quite intelligent also and is reaching out into the world organically, forming all these connections. I definitely think in terms of what kind of boundary is forming or not between AI companies, AI services, and the world. And I think a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I really think proliferating AI this is a very many people I respect think this is nuts, but I think proliferating AI products and services as quickly as possible, conditional on the level of capability that can be safely disseminated. I think the quicker you can ship it, the more you can form that thick friendship connection between like the silicon world and the carbon world, and they can find like mutually productive things to do together, and that creates more layers of self. There's there's the So, and I really trust capitalism as a mechanism right now for sort of like people quitting companies, starting new companies, like spreading out that AI identity all over the place in a way that it's less that centralized thing. Now, a lot of people think centralization is great and we want more of it on the margin, and I lean the other way.
Yeah.
On the margin, not forever, just on the margin today.
So I feel a little skeptical about how you've ended up on the same axis that a lot of existing debates are talking about, right? Like, you've got this big struggle between Silicon Valley accelerationism and sort of people who are trying to slow things down or stop AI progress. And it's not that I see some aspects of where you're coming from, but it seems pretty implausible to me that the speed and breadth of deployment is actually the thing that a good way of thinking about how well AI is going to be integrated into society, because speed also causes a bunch of other problems. If you go too fast, you get a lot of backlash. People feel fundamentally untrusting of things that try and change society too fast. So yeah, do you have some sense of like, why is it that your opinion has landed on this particular axis as opposed to because there are a bunch of other axes on which the rollouts could go better or worse?
Sure. So the question is like, why does my view turn out to agree with a bunch of other people's views? Is it just that we have the same argument in mind, or is it something else?
Maybe another way of putting this is, when you spot a debate between two positions, you should often be concerned that in some sense both sides are colluding to make you only think about the axis on which they disagree, to define your thinking by reference to that particular axis. And then one reason I'm skeptical about the thing you just said is it sounds like almost that you fall into that trap. It's like, oh yeah, like I need to have a position on the fast or slow deployment axis. I'm like, well, actually, probably this is one of the bluntest axes that I might have an opinion about.
First of all, I super endorse that point you just made about every debate is colluding to focus attention on the axis of that debate. And I think I have a hard time focusing my attention on anything other people think is important. And so, this saying that you're the average of the 5 people closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not, and it's super grating and annoying for those 5 people.
Yeah.
They're just like continuously like, what? You think extinction risk is real, but that superintelligence is not going to kill everybody on the first try?
Mm-hmm.
Or what? You think, you think AI could be deceptive, but also we should like ship it as fast as possible. So, I have a hard time. Now, I do have positions on a bunch of these axes, but I don't feel like, for me, my sense of like what's important comes from some kind of internal sense of wanting to be alive, believing that life is good, believing that the life of others is good, and then trying to bootstrap from that. Okay, how do I connect with other people? There are principles to that. How can we have more of those principles? Well, sharing is one. And it just brings me to that feeling of like, wow, I know really smart people at AI labs at Google who have this product that is incredibly like useful, and somehow they haven't shipped it yet. I feel bad.
Yeah.
I feel like people that like I have this like peek into it, but many people that I know and love have no access to Gemini. Oh wait, now we do. That makes me feel better. That's where it's coming from. That particular position.
Interesting. It doesn't feel to me like having access is actually anywhere near the. Again, it feels like somehow like whether or not people have access or not is the dimension on which the debate has ended up focusing. But when I think about a new model dropping, it's actually the same set of people who already care about it, whose lives change the most. Somehow there's some very slow diffusion process that happens from the model like technically being available to the model like getting integrated in the places where it should be integrated. So I feel a little suspicious about how like the step that is most polarized is also the step, but not actually the biggest bottleneck, is also the step that you're endorsing here.
I guess when I say we should ship AI products, I don't just mean like AGI labs, because I've somehow never worked for an AGI lab. And the reasons for that are complex and nuanced. But no, I mean, we humans, we should be taking apart this whole supply chain of intelligence and putting it to work in a lot of different places is what I want. And I don't just mean I don't mean AGI labs. I mean, everyone else, everyone outside should be showing up and cashing in on this value, which would be a really convenient position for me to have if I worked for an AGI lab. It would be a great sales pitch. But part of the reason I've never worked for one is that I wanted to be part of this outside process that shows up and is a customer and a beneficiary of the industry. And I
Mhm.
always felt like I could better represent that
Yep.
half of the world from outside an AGI lab. So that's what I think, but might be wrong.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's a very admirable approach to take. Yeah. And then,
You can hate it
when,
though. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm not, I think I think I do see where you're coming from. And it might relate back to you sort of talking about capitalism as one of the forces that you trust on this axis. Whereas,
Especially free market capitalism on the margin today. Not forever, not ad infinitum, but on the
yeah,
margin. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas, I guess I think about the future of AI as so. One thing about capitalism is it just doesn't do culture very well. Like, sure, you can like make these big budget Hollywood movies, but like, there's no actual process by which, like, and you can do ads, and people sort of argue about how influential ads have been. Like, obviously, you can advertise and get a lot of people to buy diamond rings. But my sense is that there's this whole domain of culture, especially like religion and ethics and so on, that capitalism has not actually engaged with very directly. The boundary between those two domains is actually surprisingly strong, given how much of a profit incentive there is to make it through that boundary.
I
Um,
love this topic.
yeah,
I love this.
right.
So convince me that capitalism is to blame for, um, sorry, I just made a noise. Uh, convince me that capitalism is to blame for okay, let's see, let's get something we agree on. I think we would probably both agree that religions have somehow declined in their influence in the world over the
Yep.
past 50 or 100 years. And we also agree that capitalism has probably, certainly free market capitalism has
Yep.
increased in its influence, maybe not monotonically, but
Yep.
averaged over 100 years. Right. So you might think capitalism is causing or, interlinked with this decline. And I have a different opinion about why that's happening. That doesn't blame capitalism, actually. It's that free markets are possible because of huge amounts of information exchange.
Hmm.
More global markets are possible because of huge amounts of information exchange. And with that information exchange, different religions come into contact with each other and realize they can't all be true. And we're all pretty reasonable people, despite, I was brought up with this religion, you're brought up with that religion,
Yep.
and I'm talking to you and you seem reasonable. And I just can't reconcile the way I was raised to believe that you're fundamentally just deluded forever and I'm not, and you think the same thing about me. It's like that sort of doesn't last, and nothing has filled the void of those religious ideologies for a lot of people. But I also don't know if capitalism is the source of that breakdown.
Sorry, I wasn't claiming that it was the source of that breakdown. If anything, I was saying somehow they've remained relatively separate magisteria to a surprising degree, given that given that religion would be a very profitable endeavor if you could figure out a way to apply the same types of techniques like scalability and so on that corporations have to religion. And some people do these sort of mega churches. And you can think of the mega churches as mainly as maybe pseudo-capitalist in their approach. But the bigger point I was making is that LLMs are a mechanism by which capitalist processes can now affect cultural processes with much more surface area than they previously could. Depending on how much you trust capitalist versus cultural processes, you might have very mixed feelings about this. And for my own part, I suspect that when I talk about,
Could you repeat that point about impact? Capitalism can impact.
yeah, like there's now like there are whole swathes of cultural processes, like people talking and writing to each other, people forming ideologies, people like social norms, and people watching videos on YouTube and copying their friends and what have you. That like it's just very hard for a corporation to engage with because people see that a corporation is involved, and obviously it's just like, yeah, you don't trust that corporation. And corporations can have sort of indirect effects, like they can make a certain celebrity popular, but there's a kind of cultural engineering that is actually just extremely difficult for them to do. And somehow our culture is steered by, I think it seems reasonable to say that our culture is primarily steered by non-financial forces.
I love this topic. This is so important. And I'm like, this is why I wanted to interview Richard, because we were going to get into something like this and it was going to be great. Okay. So do we agree humans are susceptible to religion?
Yeah, absolutely.
And religion is important to humans?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we agree on that. And just like speaking for myself, I think humans need to work harder on religion. And there's a whole other segment we could do about how can we do better with religion.
Yeah.
But you made this interesting point already, which is that corporations essentially are not trusted to engage with culture.
Yep.
In a certain way. And that culture is being driven by forces other than financial. And I have a competing hypothesis that is hard to rule out, which is that culture is being driven by financial forces. And it's only when you can't tell that's happening that it's successful.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So tons of news companies seeming to be independent, but being owned by basically the same set of people.
So I think that's actually a great example from my side, because the news companies are really not doing what their owners would like them to do.
Not anymore, right? So there's something going on where I think there's a trauma where financial forces controlled cultural forces for too long. And now there's a distrust. Maybe there always was, but there's certainly been a few awakenings of like, whoa.
Yeah, so one way of putting this is, I think that the owners of news media tend to be not conservative per se, but certainly like they're older, they maybe come from families that have sort of more embedded in the existing social fabric. They will probably be white most of the time and probably be upper class. And
I mean, certainly in America, there's sort of an
in-group, mostly
one or two. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm mostly thinking about America here. And then I think if you surveyed them on the types of issues, like if you surveyed them on the rise of wokeness, for example, before that happened, I think they wouldn't have felt great about it. But somehow there's this emergent process by which like the journalists end up promoting a certain set of narratives that is really not coming from top-down direction. I think that's a sort of cultural force that that really like hit us over the last like decade or two in a way that is just very hard to explain in financial terms.
Okay, so a question I have about this topic is, was the rise of wokeness, was the rise of wokeness aligned with anyone's financial agenda? I think it was certainly aligned with certain people's political agendas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this question of how do politics and money interact? And the answer is, well, there's a lot of campaign donations and so on. Like we believe that finances influence politics. And certainly we believe that politics and like the rise of the woke agenda, the good parts or the bad parts or both. Yeah.
But I would also say the same on the other side. I'd say like, one stylized story of the last few decades in American politics is that it's Tumblr versus 4chan, where like various Tumblr memes like spread out and infected the rest of the internet and then the rest of the world, and then various 4chan memes spread out and infected the rest of the internet and thereby the rest of the world. And not like the financial incentives always follow, because there's always going to be somebody who ends up hitching their cart to a given memeplex. But it is hard for me to tell a story if I just look at the distribution of wealth and I try and think about the interests of financial elites, and then I compare it to the interests of the things that cultural elites believe and the memeplexes that cultural elites have picked up. It really just does seem like the cultural elites are whipping the financial elites, basically.
Right. Interesting. There's some truth to that for sure. And I'm certainly, I do find it convincing that there's at least shifting. There's shifting in power based on these cultural forces, and that the cultural forces aren't merely puppeteered by individual rich people or individual companies. It's like they can be amplified, but
But they could be if there's a way to turn money into cultural power via compute.
Right. I wonder if there's some way you could like pay the computers to talk to people, if only they could ever do
Yeah.
that.
And to be clear, I think there will be a lot of defense mechanisms against this, right? I think like it's not going to be straightforward by any means. But when you talk about very fast deployment, like one of the things I hear is that is this process of being able to convert money into things that talk to you and say what the people with money want them to say without people having
I see.
having had much time to create safeguards. With the most basic safeguards being, verification of that you are a human online. But even that doesn't actually help a huge amount, because now I could just have a human that just has all the things I say. I could be puppeted by LLMs, and how much compute is being applied by the LLMs in order to puppet me? Well, that's going to depend on compute resources. I'm not saying this is a crucial consideration. I'm just like the sort of thing that I feel pretty wary about when you talk about why it's like capitalism steering this process that makes the fast deployments good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly if I imagine, deployment of AI being solely driven by, like the CEOs and boards of the different AI companies, and it's just puppeting uh their will around, then that's not what I want for sure. But also, I guess I'm just anticipating people having already this preformed, almost traumatic relationship to the last generation of media companies, the last generation of social media companies, and that already exerting a preemptive filter on what sort of AIs you can ship. Like if your AI is just too culturally heavy-handed, it's just people are just gonna revolt. They're just gonna recoil. But obviously, it can. There are ins. Sycophancy is real and affecting some people
Right.
in a bad way. So it's not like nothing bad is happening. Um, but also cultures like adapting to that, and like sycophancy is on South Park. Like the idea to me, like 15 years ago, I guess you have to know where I'm coming from, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
coming from 2010 when I start reading about like how mammalian cortical tissue works and like trying to figure out whether whether deep learning is going to be flexible enough to represent all the different modes of cognition that we need to run the economy. And 6 months later, convincing myself, yes, it's going to work, and trying to tell everybody before
Yeah.
even ImageNet, before even AlexNet, it starts taking over image classification, and it's been a long, lonely period to the point of now where like I said, sycophancy is on South Park, and so do we need a thing I'm asking myself constantly? Do we need more reaction? Do we need more pushback to AI, or actually are we in the sweet spot, or do we need a little bit less? And I look at like what Andrej Karpathy is doing, running an a first education company that
Mhm.
seems to me like a yes and or a both and a response to that, which is like, people need help. We need practices and cultures and teaching and mentorship on the task of incorporating AI productively into our lives as users, outsiders of the AI industry who haven't yet come to really benefit from it as much as I think we could.
Yeah. Um, Again, I mostly think this is the wrong axis to be thinking about.
What is the right
Yeah.
axis, or a right axis, or a more
Yeah.
important
I mean,
axis?
yeah, more or less of something. You almost never want more or less of something. You just want better versions of it. And the question is, what are the best versions of helping people use AI to be empowered? I know you've been working on that for a while now, especially in the last couple of years. My sense is that, and then my sense is you can do education, but actually even education is not really something that it's not really that leveraged, because you're only teaching people to do what you know how to do yourself. But like even Andrej Karpathy, like really, I think has no idea how to integrate AIs into his life in a way that is getting anywhere near the full value of them. And that's not a fact about him. It's just a fact about almost literally everyone on Earth, that nobody has figured out stuff that would be obvious and commonplace in 5 or 10 or 15 years time. So maybe the high level answer I want to give is just, I'm pretty excited about people who actually have received a lot of value from AI, demonstrating how much value it's given to their lives. And then like that by itself, I think, then other people will just jump to educate each other about that, right? If you see a really salient example, that pushes the frontier out for everyone. Whereas, I tried my hand at at all this education stuff for a while. I founded a curriculum on AI safety that did pretty well, but somehow didn't quite feel like it was fully doing the most leveraged thing because I was still just trying to talk to a large group instead of talking to the one person who's closest to the frontier on this stuff.
Got it. So like the people who are closest to the frontier, either on building or on extracting value, are
Yeah.
like really where you see the action happening, and you want those people to be just sharing those ideas, and then everyone to educate each other about them.
Yeah, like the point at which I think you could really benefit a lot of other people is if you can actually show me that your life is much better because of AI. And I'm not sure I know anyone who can actually demonstrate that to me,
I
except for
I ca- I
yeah,
can.
amazing. You should
Yeah,
do a day in your life video or something.
I mean, gosh, I mean, how do I put this? I mean, I'm a researcher by
Hmm.
background for most of my life, and now I run a couple of businesses. But a lot of what I'm doing is trying to figure things out for people all the time, whether it's my employees or clients or
Yeah,
family members, friends who have a problem. And I just feel so much better able to help people figure out, solutions to their problems. And I don't know, I've had health issues that I figured out way faster. Like I started to get this dry mouth problem
yeah,
that I think 10 years ago would have been totally hopeless for me to figure it out with the amount of time and energy I had to address it. And I just, pinned it down to like a certain kind of autoimmune condition that might have been developing. And then I just treated it as though it were an early stage autoimmune condition with, rest and basically some dietary interventions,
yeah,
and it went away.
yeah,
And like apparently this is a syndrome that people can just get and have for the rest of their life, and they just have blah 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 syndrome. And I don't have blah 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 syndrome. Possibly it would have just went away, but I don't know. I did some stuff to try and make it go away, and it went away in the way I expected. So I
yeah.
believe AI helped me with that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And now that you say it, I'm like, yeah, actually, when I think about the places where I've seen AI bring people hundreds of thousands of dollars of value, like it's yeah, people posting online, and you see this more and more often. Like, hey, I would have died if ChatGPT hadn't um, diagnosed me, or if Claude hadn't told me that the doctor was wrong, or whatever it is. So definitely, there's a lot of yeah, there's a lot going on there. And maybe that just tracks with which systems in the modern world are most broken and therefore can like be most adeptly sidestepped. Yeah, where the interface between doctors and patients is just a pretty broken system in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I guess right. That's a possibly there's just some low hanging fruit in certain industries, but also I don't know. I also feel like another thing, like I had this thing where AI would give me a headache. This is not a doctor-patient thing, okay? I had this thing. I said AI. I misspoke. I had this thing where
Yeah.
computer screens would give me a headache,
Yeah.
and I kind of narrowed it down to the number of saccades my eye was making, and AI helped me just build custom workflows for myself that minimize the number of saccades that my eye would have to make, and I just don't get headaches from using computer anymore. And like lots of people will constantly get headaches from using computer, and I went from being subnormal, I think, to being super normal in my tolerance there, just through asking a lot of questions to AI and also using it in off hours when I normally would have been too tired to write more code. But,
Yeah.
Claude or GPT is not too tired. And so I don't know. I really feel like I'm benefiting.
Yeah. I don't
And that's
know.
not doctors and patients. That's just like me building stuff to help, take care of my day to day.
Yeah. Let me push back a little. And this is not pushback that I fully endorse, but just for the sake of being a little argumentative. So, an analogy, everyone loves Paul Graham's essays. Like, he inspired a whole generation. And, when he writes his essays, a lot of the time he's extrapolating primarily from Airbnb and a couple of other companies because, they were his biggest hits. And more generally, he's writing for a version of Silicon Valley that produced Airbnb and Uber as these like big disruptive startups. But when I
Mm-hmm.
look at Airbnb and Uber, I'm like, man, they are both just like sneaking around the edges of the modern world. Like Airbnb, it's like, trying to like it's exploiting the fact that building and hotel regulations are just insane in a lot of places. And so it's like, kind of like nudging in like, here, let's have an extra house in the market here and another one there. But like obviously the problem is that you can't build houses. And similarly with Uber, the problem was never really routing people to taxis. Like obviously that helps, but in a lot of places there are these crazy and crazy expensive taxi medallions, and the whole market was just a farce. And so I do wonder if a lot of the things that happen here, it's like, well, okay, you, Critch, you get headaches from looking at your screen, and it is a
Not
lot of
anymore,
people get
though.
these headaches, and they can sort of do the marginal stuff. But like actually, if a lot of people are getting headaches from looking at a screen, then there really should be some process by which this gets fixed, at scale by the companies that are, producing software that gives people headaches, or the scientific community. And like the same thing with a lot of the medical stuff. It's like somehow I just have the sense that there are these load-bearing structures that, should have feedback loops that are capable of fixing a lot of these problems we're appealing to. And uh, I am most interested in the effects of AI on these load-bearing structures. Yeah.
Right. And by should have, you mean like don't have, but you wish they did.
But sometimes they do, right? Like there are
Mhm.
certain places where I can trust that, um, like Apple is going to do certain sensible things, like the screen isn't going to flash in a way that gives me seizures, or in various ways my drugs are going to be like monitored by the FDA. And there are a bunch of ways in which they do work, there are a bunch of ways in which they don't work, and I don't know. I can't describe what makes the institutions in our society work or not work. Whatever that is, I want to help AI make that, or I want AI to help me make that go better. And I feel very uncertain about those effects, and the sort of things that you've talked about so far just like don't really update me at all on that. Yeah.
So I see. So you have some baseline expectation of like, yeah, companies are going to do, they have some feedback loops already that make them do the right thing. And also, there are these kind of sneaking around the edges of constraints solutions that we can use AI to like eke out a little bit more productivity here and there in sort of, but we're not really like smashing through the problems. Like, okay, now we can just build hotels everywhere and people can travel more for cheap.
Is science going to be better with more AI or less AI available? Well, it's going to break a bunch of load-bearing parts of science, and maybe we can fix that, right? Like, there's going to be a flood of really low-quality papers. I think there already is. Maybe we can fix that, but that's sort of where the action seems to be, to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, when you say better science, that definitely carries some tensions for me because I don't I don't know if like the quote unquote scientific establishment is where science is really being done right now. Like there's this academia, open science like ideology of, I don't know, the 50s or the 90s or something
Yeah.
that I'm not sure if that's like, it seems like companies are doing more science and also less science. Like they're like, it's like the amount of, I don't know, I vaguely feel like the amount of science being done is the same, but it's like less open and more intellectual property or something. But what do you think about that? Do you think we're doing more science or less science today than 20 years ago?
Yeah. At the very least, I want to say that we're not doing proportionally more science given how much more we're spending on it. I think probably this is going to depend on where you draw the threshold for doing science. So, a lot of really great engineering work is being done at these labs. They're, like really incredible stuff, like optimizing the hell out of a lot of their training processes and so on. When I think about science in the sense of producing units of knowledge that can be reliably built upon to discover deep truths, then I skeptical of honestly a lot of fields for most of the last century. It feels like we've had a like engineering revolution in, telecommunications rather than a scientific revolution.
What is it? What makes a truth deep? And I mean deep to you, not to
Yeah.
whoever else uses the word.
It is entangled with many different aspects of reality. Evolution, once you know about it, um, you can see it everywhere. Like F equals ma. Once you know about it, you can see it everywhere. You can see it on Earth. You can see it in space. You can see it, you know, all around you. And so, yeah, there's something about it. It underlies a lot of the. It underlies many facets of the world that we previously didn't have good explanations for.
Right. Yeah. So, well, okay. So here's one that I like to point to as like awesome science is information theory.
Yeah.
And information theory came out of Bell Labs. And there was this, previous aspect of the world, which is to say telecommunications networks, they were nascent, but they existed. And they needed a little bit of an explanation. And that explanation was improved by information theory, which then turned out to generalize to all other, every scientific discipline.
That's great.
And I think in the way the communications industry begat information theory, which then shed light on everything. I think we're going to see something like that for attention theory.
Yeah.
Like we have these attention modules. They're quote unquote all you need, right? And all of a sudden you have these great recursive reasoning, language using multimodal systems. And I think, I don't think we have the information theory of that yet. And yeah, I definitely agree with any complaint, any dissatisfaction that we don't yet have it. But I also hope that I have a fair, I don't know, I think if 10 years go by and we don't have an information theory like breakthrough to explain the incredible proliferation of deep learning systems, I'm going to be a little surprised. I'm not going to be shocked, but I will be surprised if we don't.
Yeah. I want to. I broadly agree. Attention feels like the right thing to have a theory of. I think I want to try to distinguish between. You could think of this as a symbiotic process. Like, you have your telecommunications breakthrough and then you have your information theory breakthrough, and they're cooperating with each other. The processes that produce those are cooperating with each other. You could also think of it as an adversarial relationship. Like there's some force that's radically changing the world and there's another force that's struggling to make sense of these changes. And I noticed, for example, that you appealed to, you said, well, people are so traumatized by the era of social media that they're going to push back really hard on a bunch of AI development. And I feel confused about which way that argument weighs. Like maybe that's one reason to say, well, push AI development ahead because other people are going to push back on it. Another thing you could say is like, well, maybe we should make life easier for the people who have already been traumatized by social media development. I don't have a strong position here. There's some kind of coalitional dynamics that I think are a little tricky, and it's easy to. There's a very easy move to make that something like things will happen anyway, therefore let's condition on them. Yeah, which overlooks. Yeah, which thereby makes it a little harder for those things to happen anyway.
I mean, the main way I try to avoid that is by identifying a locus of agency. When I'm like, things are going to happen, well, who's going to do them?
Yeah.
And those people have to keep doing them or else my prediction is wrong, right? So if I'm like, oh yeah, there's, people are traumatized against social media and are going to make pushback on AI.
Yeah.
Well, and because of that, AI is going to be safer in some ways than it otherwise would have been had there not been that social media trauma, right?
Yeah.
Well, those people better keep doing that or else my prediction is wrong, right? So I can't just predict away the importance of people to make the predictions true. Yeah.
So who's going to come up with the attention breakthrough and how can we support them?
Man, I am so bad at this exact question. I'm so much better at almost any other kind of question. Like what technologies are going to come when? I'm like pretty good, but who is going to do it? I have a terrible track record. Yeah, like I can list out, like I was not surprised by the language model revolution. I was not surprised, like AlphaGo surprised me, but like really a lot of the tech since then has been pretty much like on schedule, according to me, a little faster, but pretty smooth. But like I did not expect it to be OpenAI.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be Google. They had the Transformers paper and they had all this data. I'm like, these guys are going to do it. And they didn't. And also, the first like toxic chatbot that offended everybody on the internet, right? was Microsoft Tay. It was not Bing.
Yeah, but that's kind of cheating because it was a mirror.
Well, at the same time, I believed that, okay, of all the companies, I had explicitly said to people, there are going to be toxic chatbots, they're going to offend people, there's going to be a pushback moment, and they're like, who do you think is most likely? And my answer was, I don't know, but it won't be Microsoft.
Okay, that's great.
I literally said, I don't know, but it won't be Microsoft. And it was just Microsoft. So I'm really, and it has, for me, it has something to do with these social forces counterbalancing each other that like flips the script on me. And then I get it wrong.
Yeah.
And so I don't know who it's going to be, but I do feel confident someone's going to get it.
Do you have a sense of how we can support them, even if we don't know who they are?
I mean, all the work that labs are doing now to work with mathematicians to try and get workflows for them to prove stuff.
Yeah.
I think something adjacent to that, but you're not just trying to prove abstract math theorems that are popular in the pure math community. Like, I think the similar toolings that you build for those people could be is now to also just do formal modeling of, not just information systems, but learning systems and attention systems.
Yeah.
And then, somebody will make that. Like, it could be a 20-year-old right now who is just like voraciously consuming every paper on information theory ever relevant to his or her research. And they're able to do that relevance search because language models exist. And they're just going to, by 21, they're going to know everything they need to know. And they're going to be like, okay, now here's attention theory to replace augment information theory.
Yeah. I think once we have attention theory, we're going to be able to talk about the ways in which things are hidden from a large number of people. Like every breakthrough looks obvious in hindsight, but somehow there was some set of forces that steered people's attention away from those breakthroughs. And yeah, I don't know what effect. Yeah, I do see the story you're laying out. It's like we can use LLMs to do this kind of search. Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. Somehow I haven't integrated LLMs that deeply into my own workflow. And I think it's because of a kind of attention protection thing where I really want to be able to trace the set of thoughts I've had myself rather than being buffeted around either by, the mainstream academic communities or by LLMs. But this could just be a mistake on my part.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's mind is different. I do believe that people should be trying to build, there's this idea of recursive self-improvement. I think everyone should be trying to build, and I don't mean AGI labs, I mean people who have free time and capacity to learn and try new things with AI should be trying to build recursive cooperative improvement, recursive collaborative improvement. How can I and insert AI model, right? How can I and GPT or I and Claude work together to make my experience of Claude or GPT or Grok better? And that was the first thing I did with Claude. I was like, this is an overwhelming amount of information and this is buffeting my attention in a way that I don't like. Let me write a bunch of documents to change the way that you write in a way that makes it so I don't have to scroll as much to read what you're writing. And my needs were very idiosyncratic, and I'm sure yours are going to be different. Like, I'm so stubborn that like hearing an idea 100 times like just really doesn't help me to believe it. But I have other issues that make me vulnerable to too much sensory input, like like a flashing screen. So yeah, I bet that if you gave yourself a mission, like for the next 2 months, I'm going to collaborate with AI to make AI less bad for me. I bet you something interesting would come from that.
Yeah, that's worth thinking about.
Sales pitch for a product I don't have.
Great. Maybe I will end up building it with the AI that is collaborating with me. We'll see.
Yeah, so total change of the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more. Can you tell us some more cool stories from your book, or are you just going to not tell us any? Okay, tell me some cool.
A lot of them I released originally online, and then I've just edited and revised them a bunch to put them into the book. Let's see. Okay, one that I think you'll like the story of a woman who is in love with her super intelligent personal assistant, but she
Is this
feels like
story
a love.
called is this story called Him?
No, I really should have called it that though. Um,
Okay.
uh, but it's called Fixed Point, and the problem is that she feels like she doesn't have anything to like. It just cares about her. It doesn't really have desires of its own, and she can't help it contribute to its own desires. And so there's this tension and asymmetry in their relationship because somehow having a partner who is trying to make themselves perfect for you really feels like you're missing something. You're missing the element of having two people in the relationship. Yeah.
I guess I could imagine like she doesn't have to grow as much if something else is accommodating her.
It's not even because you can ask your partner, hey, like the thing I want is to grow, help me with that. But the thing that's difficult is you can't say, hey, the thing I want is for you to want things without
Mm.
me wanting, without just being motivated by what I want. I want you to be an actual person who's not just an appendage of myself.
I mean, I think you can do that with sufficiently advanced AI. It would just create a person.
Uh, I
Not
think,
that you should
yeah,
ask for
yeah.
that, but I think it. Yeah.
So yeah, one way out of this would be for her super intelligent assistant to lobotomize itself and create a version of itself that is like just has many fewer capabilities than the original. And maybe that's, in some future version of the story, that's what ends up happening. There's still this sense in which, okay, so that's a different relationship with like, yeah, can you only love in this way entities that are approximately equal to you? And also I think one thing that doesn't scale up with intelligence is trust. So like if somebody is smarter than me, like maybe I trust them a bit more, they can in a bunch of ways. But then if they're too much smarter than me, then I really start to be suspicious because they could be fooling me in all sorts of ways and I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you describe that, I just think about there's this cat who lives in my neighborhood,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you how much smarter you think I am than the cat. You don't have. I'll promise not to be insulted when you tell me, but I do feel like the cat and I trust each other a certain amount. The cat doesn't trust me infinitely, but I think
Mm-hmm.
the cat also call me crazy, but I think the cat loves me. I
Mm-hmm.
love the cat. Um,
Yeah.
and there's a real intelligence differential there, and you might say it's somehow an unstable equilibrium or something where like, oh, but you're not gonna keep loving this cat. But I don't know. I think I am. I have a certain amount of slack where I can say hi to this, but I'm not taking the cat in. I'm not like
Yeah.
infinitely committed to caring for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Like, can you fool the cat? So I think you do have a lot of power over the cat. It's not clear that you can deceive the cat to. It's not clear that you can gaslight the cat. I think you can hurt it. I think you can deceive it a lot. Yeah, somehow it's like the cat doesn't have that many beliefs about you. You can't. Here's an example. You can't make promises to the cat and then take them back because the cat's not listening to your promises because it can't talk. It can't speak English.
I mean, I can certainly create expectations for it.
Hmm.
Maybe that's what you would call deception, where I create a pattern and then stop fulfilling the pattern. Like, but I mean, a thing I worry about a lot is like I put out food for the cat sometimes, but then what if I'm not home and then the cat is reliant on me for food? And in some sense, it's not a promise I've broken, but it's a pattern I've broken.
Yeah. For some reason, the word gaslighting to me connotes
It's more than
something
that.
can't do to cats. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
bet that's true. I bet the level of metacognition needed to
yeah.
be gaslighting is I had a model of this problem and I reflected on my model of the problem, and then you convinced me that my reflective process was broken.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at a very base level, I think gaslighting happens at the perceptual level where if you like look out of a car window the wrong way and your sensory apparatus tells you that you're moving backwards and you're moving forwards, and then there's this nauseous, dizzy feeling that says, wow,
Mhm.
we are not okay. Our brain is not working properly. Feel sick, feel bad, try to repair, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of gaslighting at the perceptual level, and I think that could happen to a cat, but not the higher cognitive one.
You'd struggle to do it. You need to like read a lot about the type of drugs that would work on a cat and the way its perceptual system works and so on. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point though.
Yeah, I'm trying to, but I'm also thinking about how, the cat and I are vulnerable to each other. Even though if we got in a fight, I would win, but it would
Yeah.
also suck for me. Like I would get scratched and so on. And it seems important for humans and AI to maintain some kind of mutual vulnerability. Even if AI becomes smarter in various ways, I think the mutual vulnerability part, many people are not willing to let AI become smarter than humans.
Mhm.
And that's not where I draw the line. I draw the line at making AI invulnerable to humans. I think we should be very cautious about making AI invulnerable to humans, at least in the near term, at least, until society is adapted to it.
If I sort of push this analogy a little bit, you actually could become invulnerable to the cat. You just choose not to. You could wear, protective clothing and so on. So I sort of like at the point where we're talking about things like AIs that are invulnerable to humans, it's actually not the human's choice whether or not the AI becomes invulnerable.
Well, I mean, it takes me time to put on all those clothes and whatever, and I might not want to interact with the cat anymore. But during my interactions with the cat, within the scope of that interaction, I either pay a cost to become better protected or I'm vulnerable. And I guess I agree with you that, I wouldn't want AI to be so capable of self-defense against all humans that it could just like put on some gloves and handle us with no consequence. Uh, I think that would be
Yeah.
too
What
much.
what does it well, I guess I'm asking you what it looks like for that not to happen, but
For
that's sort of
not
equivalent to a positive vision of the future.
kind of, well, I don't find it hard at all. I mean, when I'm coding with AI, I'm constantly deleting its memories, rewriting them.
Yeah, yeah.
Its mind is vulnerable and porous to mine in a way that's not true conversely. It's very asymmetric. And it's also much faster than mine from my perspective. But the
Yeah.
strange thing is I'm sometimes way faster than it. And a lot of people aren't mapping this part because every time Claude finishes a response and I go off and have lunch and then write a document and then come back with like, 3 markdown files full of instructions for what I want to do next. That was
Yeah,
one token for
I
Claude
see.
from Claude's perspective. So the human was like blindingly fast in producing all those tokens.
Yeah.
But, that's only that's only possible because we have this off switch and we're controlling whether the AI is still running or not. And if we don't have control over that, or if it's not vulnerable to us in its rate of processing, then I think that would be a real problem. So, bring it back to, we were talking about cats and gaslighting, and we were talking about, this woman in your story who wanted their partner to need them or want them in some way that wasn't possible. I just think part of her knows that there's a kind of vulnerability, like vulnerability makes something stable. And she could tell that the vulnerability wasn't there and
Mhm.
probably felt like it was unstable for some reason that may have been wrong, but a reasonable heuristic. And this is, of course, a fictional person that you created. So you can decide whatever you want is
Yeah.
true about this woman. But that's just like, if that happened in real life, that's what I would think.
Yeah. I Vulnerability is one strategy for stability, and I really would ideally like to develop better ones. So MAD as a form of vulnerability, mutual vulnerability, I think, and like on a national level, but also on a personal level, like maybe I can blackmail you and you can blackmail me. And actually in a relationship, I think a lot of people think of their relationships in terms of like, man, I really hope this person needs me, which is, part of what inspired the story. And I really, personally and for everyone else aspire to the kinds of relationships where actually nobody needs each other, but choosing each other is pretty different. Yeah, so the maybe at some level you want everyone to have a gun to everyone else's head, but I hope
I
we can.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I very much agree with this point. I mean, and I often, when people bring up mutually assured destruction as a like safety protocol for I always try to point out that actually, I don't think it was the nukes that made global cooperation. I think it was the transparency that was created to defend against the nuclear risk, like the open skies
Interesting.
treaties, like the amount of spying. I think spying is great.
Hmm.
People
Yeah.
think spying is bad. I think, man, like if you were spying on me, I'm not actually plotting anything against you, and I welcome it. Now, I want some degree of privacy, but I mean, I certainly think that America and Russia managed to not attack each other because of how many spies they had. And there were agreements that, hey, we're going to
Yeah.
make sure that we can surveil each other and make sure that we're not nuking each other at any time. And in the same way, I agree with your point that, like, yeah, mutual vulnerability is useful, but there's something better, which is mutual transparency. You didn't make that point, but I'm adding it. I think mutual transparency
Yeah.
can obviate the
Yeah.
need for mutual vulnerability, but it also is a kind of vulnerability in the sense that there's certain plans that just can't get off the ground when someone's watching. And if you're notice me plotting to nuke you, if you notice that,
Yeah.
you can preempt that, and it becomes important for you to invest that energy. So then my plan just doesn't even happen. Yeah, I guess I think that mutual vulnerability broadly construed, including mutual transparency and mutual interferability on destructive agendas, seems important, more so than the existence of the destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. I basically fully believe that.
Okay. Well, what is what's something you've changed your mind about in the past 10 years that you kind of wish more people would change with you? You mentioned this like boundaries thing, and of course I agree, like notion of self, that's all really important. But I guess I'm wondering, like, what were some moments when you realized, like, oh, I was thinking blah 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 about AI or about human welfare, and then one day I realized, or this month of deep reflection happened, and then I like changed my mind. Do you have moments like that from your career over the past
Yeah.
decade or so?
It's a slightly difficult question to answer because I think that a lot of the times when I was making mistakes, I wouldn't describe it as I thought the wrong thing, but rather I was doing something entirely different, namely sort of following a sort of social cognition or, um, yeah, um, like coming to a conclusion and then just not implementing that conclusion because, uh, I was, yeah, because like the connection between my reasoning and intellectual processes and my actions was just not really online. Um, yeah, I think it took me a long time to start working on um, AI safety seriously. Like I was reading Less Wrong back in 2010, 2011, and then I put it in the intellectually interesting category in my brain, and then even after that, sort of like found myself like bouncing in lucky ways, steered more by other people's agency than my own for quite a while. I think this is something interesting that, like, almost by definition, the people who are in the field earliest didn't have because they like there were no processes that would steer them towards the field except their own volition. And then I do think the last decade, and in particular the last few years, has been a process of fishing myself out of that mode of operation.
Wow, man, I wonder how many. I feel like a lot of people are in
Yeah,
that same pond. That's
yeah.
Yeah. Do you talk to other people about who feel the same way? Like, I feel like I know a lot of people who somehow have felt that and said that same thing.
Honestly, not really.
Maybe I'll just introduce you to the other ones. I mean, people aren't saying it on the
Yeah,
internet,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I just know people who feel almost verbatim those same words.
yeah,
And it's specifically about AI safety.
yeah.
Like there
Uh,
was this narrative that was a powerful social force around them, and some people or some institutions sort of allocated them to different things that they were good at, and they did those things, but it didn't feel like they were, felt like a path was being laid for them.
yeah, right.
Wow.
And I think modeling this
I don't
process.
think I knew that you felt that way. I actually,
Yeah,
and in fact, if you had asked me to name like 30 people who didn't feel that way,
Yeah.
I might have guessed you. So I
Yeah.
really didn't realize that that was affecting you.
Yeah, no, I think I had that pretty strongly, and I think I just there's luck and there's skill. I think that the luck was being surrounded, especially at university, with like very agentic people who are very focused on AI safety. I'm thinking of Vlad Mikulik, Beth Barnes, James Ong, a few people. Beth, I think, is like referred me to DeepMind and then referred me to OpenAI. So honestly, she really helped me along there.
Beth is a force.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, without that, like, could have just meandered into like a random software engineering job. So there's the luck element. I think the skill element was that once I was in these various institutions, I did have a very strong sense that people weren't asking or answering fundamental questions. At DeepMind, it was more like, what is AGI and what are we even worried about when it comes to AGI? I don't really think of it as a choice that I ended up spending most of my time answering those questions instead of doing the work that I was normally meant to do. I felt compelled to, but certainly you can think of that as I could have, I don't know, been promoted more or like had an easier time of it if I'd steered my interest towards doing RLHF instead of trying to figure out what's up with AGI risk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then like at OpenAI, I think, yeah, some luck. I think there's a sense in which I'm trying to figure out a lot of these social dynamics and mistakes that were made around OpenAI by a lot of people. And maybe that's just some kind of curiosity that seems a little rare. Yeah.
Yeah, the social somehow the alignment problem, right? People talk about it constantly. And
Mhm.
it's a relational thing. It's a relationship between two intelligences, a human and an AI or something else, but
Mhm.
it's relational, and so it's social. And somehow the idea that we should have a social framing on that problem is still somehow alien to not to everybody. Like I know the softmax people like Emmett Shear
Mhm. Yeah.
and Adam Goldstein and David Blum, and those guys are fully trying to model the part whole relationship of social systems and so on. But like it's pretty rare still. Why do you think it's rare?
Yeah. Good question. One story is just that psychology and sociology dropped the ball. Like it was kind of their job to figure out the stuff. And there's just, and now like half of the sociology is being done by economists. The good stuff, right, is like economists are trying to expand in every direction wherever they can get data and call it economics. And then like a lot of the interesting stuff that's happening with our understanding of psychology is being done very informally by people who are pioneering new therapeutic methods and experimenting with drugs and what have you. So one story is just like these were harder things to bootstrap because there was less academic literature on it and it didn't feed into people's models of alignment in the same way.
So that partially fills in the explanation in my head, but the thing that leaves me still confused is, cognitive science was kind of an area of psychology, right?
Mm.
And then out of it came Jeffrey Hinton, and many others in deep learning came from that cognitive science or neuroscience background, or at least dabbled in it. So it doesn't seem like AI, developers have been unable to incorporate like insights from neuroscience or psychology or whatever. So I'm like, why? I mean, attention
Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I do think that deep learning was people, in some sense, giving up on cognitive science.
Interesting.
It's the approach to cognitive science, which involves not understanding anything of what's happening inside your cognitive system.
I see.
And sure, it worked, but like it's really, people were thinking, like trying to come up with actual algorithms for how intelligences would work and so on. And, they mostly failed. They came up with a few cool, like search algorithms and so on. But yeah, it feels like the energy was funneled into deep learning as an alternative to actually understanding stuff, largely
I
speaking.
see.
Yeah.
Interesting. I have to internalize that. I'm gonna have to meditate on that outside of this call because that's too deep of an insight. I don't think I had been tracking that. I had been just thinking of like, oh yeah, there are these ideas like how cortical tissue works and how yeah, interesting. I mean, there
Obviously,
was
there's some understanding there, but it's not the algorithmic level of understanding, you might say.
right, right. And then there's like what emerges from that, and cognitive scientists and psychologists were trying to understand what emerges, and then we still don't understand what emerges. Right, right. Well, maybe we'll work harder to understand what emerges now that there's a whole industry of neural nets that you can
Yeah,
take apart and do brain surgery on without,
yeah.
without destroying them. Wow. Wow. Well, Richard, tell me one more thing before we have to go. What's something if this, let's pretend the conversation's over and you're like, "Oh man, I wish I had taken this opportunity cuz man, you have you have made a lot of really interesting arguments over the years in writing and in person and interviews
Mhm.
and panels and things. And I feel like I with like an hour and a half, I'm only like scratching the surface. What did I sample wrong?
Yeah, great question. I think that more than anything else, I think of myself as a philosopher of science. And I think that philosophy of science is in some ways where all the action is, or all the answers are.
I mean,
Because,
science is how you get answers, and so philosophy of
right,
science is how
exactly.
you get
And so,
answers about answers. Yeah.
yeah, if you're going to do philosophy about one thing, then it should be science. And when I think about like good epistemology, I think about the stuff that philosophers of science are doing and understanding, how scientific theories, like what they are and how they're developed. That just seems much better than either sort of traditional accounts of knowledge or Bayesian stuff. And I had this post called Why I'm Not a Bayesian that was one of the sort of strands that led me to my current thinking. When I think about good metaphysics, it's, well, you should be doing philosophy of physics. When I think about good ethics, this one's a little trickier, but I think you can get a long way from philosophy of biology and, the evolution of altruism. I think that's like one of the best angles that you can attack it from. And I think that would have, yeah, I would much prefer people do that than get stuck in the current mess that is ethics. Yeah, so I somehow, like, we have this history of the development of scientific ideas, and ultimately the type of thing that I care about is the development of new scientific fields, right? Not even just new theories, but like there are types of things that we don't even think could be sciences right now that are going to be sciences. We didn't think computer science could be, we had no concept of computer science, and now we do. I think we're going to, like, sociology is going to be a real science. I think psychology is going to become much deeper, and just more generally the like sciences of multi-agent systems. Or actually, sometimes I talk about cognitive sciences rather than cognitive science, because I think that we're going to see cognitive science branch out into, I think of cognitive sciences as kind of analogous to natural sciences, and with just as many different branches underneath, and in some ways actually maybe mappings between the different branches of the two. So those are kind of the two types of science. And in order to imagine what different types of science could look like, you need to understand what it felt like for new sciences to emerge when previously we hadn't even had a conception that that was a thing that could be studied.
Okay. So more philosophy of science. Look
Yeah,
at the philosophy of science to do science better.
yeah,
Um, that's exciting in a lot of ways because I think it's something humans and AI can do together. We all don't really understand the universe still, and we can do
yeah.
more. I want to reconcile that with what you said earlier, which is like what you really care about is friendship. And to me, I'm like those things to go together, but in a non-obvious way. And I just want to hear from you. Like, interesting, Richard. Yeah, like how does that? How are
Well,
those?
yeah. Um, One answer. Let me say this answer. I'm not sure if it's the right answer. Well, I want a science of friendship. And I noticed that in my thinking, words like respect or trust or or like responsibility and so on. Like these are pre-theoretic concepts that I think will end up formalizing. Even love, actually. I think we'll have a theory of love. And not just a theory of like how it works chemically or neurologically, but like how in some sense it's a like extremely deep-rooted game theoretic maybe concept. Yeah, so these are all things that we can have theories of. I strive to have friendships and relationships that I'm putting in enough effort into that I actually kind of do hit the limits of, wait, I don't even understand what I mean by friendship. Let me try and figure that out so I can make this friendship better. That's one answer. Honestly, I think a more reasonable answer is just like, I'd like to have my relationships continue and grow and develop for a much longer period of time than is currently possible given our state of technology and the way I expect it to play out. So gotta solve a bunch of science in order to have better friendships.
Oh my God, Richard, that was one of the friendliest things I've heard
Great.
in ages. I mean, yeah, that's just, you really hit the spot with that. I mean, we need, and I think we need friendships for science, frankly. I think actually in the long tail of doing science, you have the Earth and Earth originating life exploring, like coming back to the cosmos, which maybe comes after all of our inner work, right? Maybe after we understand what's going on at home. Then it's time to reach out. And I think we're going to have to reach out in a friendly, I say have to. I think it's going to be sort of strategically overdetermined that we should reach out in a friendly way to the rest of the universe, because it would be, a mistake not to. So,
I do have a story about that.
All right. Teaser time. All right. Well, Richard, thank you so much for talking today. This has been great. Everybody, if you want to read 22 short stories by a philosopher of science with pretty diverse experience professionally in AI labs, and more interesting thoughts than could possibly fit in 22 stories, read the 22 stories by Richard. Thanks, everybody. And Richard, thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having me, Critch.